right. So here we go. Well, let's introduce Mano, who is so awesome. Now, we do play trivia on Thursday nights. If you are so inclined, it's a Zoom thing. We have been playing for 300 games, and Mano is one of the people who play. Several people in this group play trivia often, and if you want to join us, it's a lot of fun. It's a social game. But Mano has given us a talk years ago on Copernicus, right? Copernicus? Yeah. So Mano is a professor. He's retired, right? And I don't know how much of his biography he's going to give us, but there is a note in the brochure if you want to know more about Mano. But Mano has decided, he went through a whole series of, should I talk about this? Should I talk about that? Should I talk about this? So he finally settled on
Mano?
Oh, Mano, free will. And so I hope you really enjoy it. He does have a few books over here for sale. I think I see 3. They're $20, and you better mob him. You can get them online on Amazon or.
No, are you holding the microphone in your hand? No, because you're doing this. It's going to be really fun sound on the video.
Nobody really cares what I say. I'm just making up most of this anyway. So, okay, so we're going to, as I said, we're going to be doing this, and then after this we have pizza. And don't forget, we're also going to go over to Michael's in Old Town and have Mexican food. And I will ask a little bit later how many people think will show up, because I really want to be able to let them know. And Mano brought, he brought it. He brought his daughter and son-in-law in the back of the room. So I hope you all brought your own daughter and son-in-law, because
Bring your kid
we're supposed to. It's like a show and tell, right? So I should have had her introduce him. That would have been really fun. But so yeah, they're not going to stay the whole day. They said, but all right, Mano, come on up. Do you have that on?
No.
Put that on.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Okay. This is unplugged. Is it supposed to be unplugged? The computer? This is unplugged to the floor. Is it supposed to be?
Yeah, because he's using his computer.
Oh, because he's got his on. Okay. Here, let me do it. And I'll put that on. All right. There you go. Mano.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for coming, though you had no choice. That's an obligatory joke with all of us free will skeptics. So I'm going to talk about the death of free will. And when I finally decided on this topic, Karen, who's here, said, you better make sure there's a lot of time for questions. And so when Karen says something, you do it, because you don't defy Karen. And so I'm going to make my talk as short as possible, so that there'll be plenty of time to discuss these questions. But while I'm talking, if there are any questions of clarification that you have, please stop me, because that's something to clarify immediately. But if you want to get into an extended discussion on the context, maybe keep that to the end. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, so let's talk about this. Why do we think we have free will? I'm assuming people who do think that. Because the feeling of agency and volition seems so strong. We have the sense that we are deciding things. We choose to do things. We grow up believing in it. That's something we just absorb it. It is embedded in our language. We use words like choose, decide, judge. All those things have within them embedded the notion of having a will that acts freely. Then the common ideas of morality, crime, and punishment all depend on the fact that we have free will. So there's something frightening about abandoning that. Where does it leave us with all those other things? Okay. Belief in gods depend upon it. I mean, what does sin mean? For example, if you have no free will, it ceases to exist. What does even believing in a god, how can that give you any virtue if you do not freely choose to believe in God? So all these things work from the time we are children, from the time we are born, to give us a firm concept of free will. Yes.
We try to blur it sometimes in criminal cases where insanity plea.
This comes at the end. So as I said, at the moment, let's keep it for clarifications. If I say something that's unclear, let's discuss it, but we'll get to the discussion. There'll be plenty of time for that, but you're right, that's an important point. So where does the free will come from? Well, this question has been debated from the ancient times with philosophers, but the more modern version of it can be traced to some extent what we call Cartesian dualism from the philosopher René Descartes, famous for the phrase, I think, therefore I am. And he postulated, where is this, what is this I that thinks? And he said that there is in the central part of our brain, the pineal gland, and that's where the soul exists, and it's in contact there with the vital spirits, and the vital spirits are the ones that connect to the body's motion. So the soul in the pineal gland, and he chose the pineal gland is because the symmetry. Now we know that the pineal gland just secretes the melatonin, but at that time it seemed a plausible location for our soul. That's it. So what this is, there's a belief that somewhere inside our brain is some kind of sophisticated control room, like the deck of the Starship Enterprise, where all the information streams in from everywhere via our senses and from the prior knowledge embedded in our brains, and that is in this room in some disembodied entity, the real I, that views all this information, decides what to do, and then sends out commands that are executed by the body. Philosopher Gilbert Ryle supports Kohn on this idea of a personal, independently existing, conscious, non-material entity that we call the mind. He called it derisively the ghost in the machine. And he says, there is no ghost in the machine. Okay? What it is, and this is a phrasing that comes from the biologist Anthony Cashmore, he says our thoughts and our actions are determined by our brains that are the product of our genes. When he says our genes, it means just not only our DNA, but also our biological history, okay, embedded in us. The environment that we are in, that sends in stimuli from the outside, and there's a random stochastic process that we cannot control. At the fundamental level, it's quantum mechanical, but one can think of it as, things that happen in the environment, that all of these function unconsciously under the influence of natural laws, the laws of science, and give instructions to the motor neurons as well as create our consciousness. So these processes, the GES, combine to send instructions to the part of the brain that controls our motor neurons that tell us what to do. Okay? So when I decide, right now I'm going to pick up this thing. Why did I decide that? Well, somewhere in my subconscious, those processes combine to tell me to do that. And it's also the source of a sense of consciousness. So basically the model is that our unconscious GES sends signals to our motor neurons, that is the neurons in our brain that tell us what to do, and that leads to the actions. But the unconscious GES also does something else. It also sends information to our conscious mind that tells us to make this decision, but that decision comes before the action. Yeah. So two processes are going on. The GES is sending signals to our motor neurons to initiate the action, but it's also sending a signal to our conscious brain that tells us to make the decision. And the key thing is that the second one, that conscious decision, happens to occur before the action, so we have this sense that the conscious mind determined the action, when actually the unconscious part had already determined the action. So we labor under this delusion that we have, maybe because of the temporal sequence of those events, is such that the conscious decision comes to our mind before the action, and we are not aware of the unconscious process that preceded both of them. It's a tricky argument. People following me on this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cool. Since we cannot control the unconscious working of the brain, we have no free will. That's basically the theoretical argument against free will. Now there's a question of what is meant by free will, and there are many definitions of this, and they have pluses and minuses. The one that I like particularly is because it's defined negatively, but I think it makes it as clear as possible. Free will is the belief in a component to biological behavior that is something more than the unavoidable consequences of GES. So in other words, if it's something other than the GES that's acting, that is what constitutes free will. Okay? So it's defined negatively. Some people try to define it positively as saying free will is the ability to make a decision other than the decision I actually made. So I decided to pick this up. Free will means I could have decided not to pick it up. But that leaves, there are problems with that. I like this one because it's a purely materialistic definition. So to believe in free will requires us to believe in the existence of a non-material entity that can change the causal behavior of the material entities that make up our brains, thus violating the laws of physics and biology. Now, neuroscience, modern neuroscience, supports the idea that our consciousness and sense of free will are epiphenomena, the products of the firing of the neurons that make up the brain. They are due to purely materialistic causes, nothing more. The Stanford neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky just last year published his book, Determine the Science of Life Without Free Will, where he makes this case very cogently. And I would recommend that if those of you are interested in reading more, get that book. He writes very well, and it's very clear. He marshals all the biological evidence for thinking that there's no such thing as free will. There are other physical arguments and so on, that preceded him, but he is a very good writer, and it's worth reading. So now look, those are the theoretical arguments against free will. Now what are the experimental evidence against it? The early experiments used something called electroencephalography. Susan, I'm going to quiz you on how to say that. Okay, at some point.
Oh, jeez.
Okay.
How about next trivia?
Yeah, next trivia. That's going to be there. The earliest experimental stuff was done by someone called Gray Walter in 1963. It was an unpublished result. I'm not sure why he didn't publish it, but it was communicated widely in the community. And I like it because it gives the clearest example of how it acts. What he did, this is 1963. You remember the slide projectors with a carousel on it? Those of you older will remember. You had a slide projector with slides, of course, and it was on a rotating thing, and you were given a control, and you press a button, and it rotates to the next slide. Okay? So people were given a slide projector and a control button and told whenever they feel like it, press the button to go to the next slide. Now, like all psychology experiments, those people were lied to. Yeah? Okay? And the button that they were given was a dummy. It didn't do anything. But they were in part of the brain study, and they had an implant in the brain at the motor neurons, which would accentuate that signal, and when that signal was accentuated, that is what would advance the slide projector, not the pressing the button. And what the people found was that the slide advanced before they decided to press it. And really confused them because it suddenly, and they tried not to press the button because they thought they were going to advance it twice. They didn't realize that the button had nothing to do with it. The slide advanced because of a process in their brain that happened before they decided to do it. That was a crude experiment, but very, what I would call, it's very good in explaining exactly what's going on. Benjamin Libet was the one who really put it on a more concrete basis in 1983 onwards. And again, it was involved putting implants in people's brains to measure what they call the readiness potential, the potential that triggers action. And what he found was the conscious decision to act, symbolized by the letter W, occurs about 0.2 seconds before the action, but about 0.35 seconds after the readiness potential in the unconscious part of our brain gets activated and initiates the action. So basically you have the readiness potential gets activated about 0.55 seconds before the actual action. The decision is about 0.35 seconds after the readiness potential has occurred. So the conscious decision that we have made occurs about 0.35 seconds after the unconscious readiness potential has occurred. And then the action is about 0.2 seconds later. That's about the time taken for the signal to go from the conscious part of our brain to the actual action. Okay. The recent neuroscience, 2007 and later, uses fMRI, and the results support the earlier work. So what they have done is they put people in these machines, fMRI machines, to map the brain, and they ask them to do various tasks. They give them buttons and so on, and say, decide when you're going to press a button and whether you're going to press the left button or the right button, and go ahead and do it. And the people in the other room watching the monitors would see the brain patterns, and they would record these brain patterns. And by making studies of that, they looked at what they call the predict signal pattern activity in the supplementary motor area of the brain. And they would look at these patterns, look at the decisions, and create correlational maps about how the brain patterns corresponded to the decisions. And based on that, then they could put people in the machine and look at their brain patterns and predict what they were going to decide. So basically, they found that the decisions can occur, they can predict the decisions can occur anywhere up to 10 seconds before the person becomes aware of having made them. Okay? So it was strange. The people in the machine, the people in the other room looking at the machines could tell 10 seconds before the person in the machine decided something. It's kind of creepy. Okay. Now, the 10 seconds was about the maximum. These predictions are not 100%. So, I mean, as Kyle would know, these are statistical decisions, 60%, 70%, but they're getting better as the software and the hardware gets better. So, it's not 100%, it's not a slam dunk, but it is pretty significant. So what are the inference from experiments? Comes back that the unconscious GES does two things. It sends a signal to the readiness potential or the supplementary motor area, and which in turn sends a signal to the motor neurons that triggers the action. The unconscious GES also sends a signal to the conscious part of the brain, which is where we think we are making the decision. But the W, the conscious decision or the will, occurs after the RPSMA is activated, but before the action. And this leads to the illusion of volition or free will. So what does the lack of free will say about our sense of self? Because that's what really concerns people. What does it mean to, if I say I don't have free will, what does it say about me and my place in the world? The idea is that when I say I am a unitary system, not a dualistic one consisting of a body, which is a machine, and a ghost that tells the machine what to do. But we are a unitary system made up of material objects obeying the laws of nature that function unconsciously and make decisions. Although I may feel that there is another I within my body freely making decisions, this perception is an illusion. But the sensory experience of choosing is not a fiction. We do choose, but it occurs after the decision has been made. Okay? It is more accurate to say the decision was made by me than I made the decision. You see, there's a subtle difference. Okay? And because of the stochastic element in the GES, the lack of free will, and this is what concerns people, does not mean that our world or our behavior is deterministic in the classical sense. We are not predetermined to behave the way we are, because there's always some random element that can change things. So if we hypothetically could turn the clock back a few seconds before, my behavior now might be different, because there might have been some stochastic element that changed. A quantum mechanical system flipped one way instead of the other, causing me to change my decision. Okay, so it's not that lack of free will means that everything is preordained from the beginning of time. Things have randomness in it, and that will change things. So we may have what we call quantum statistical determinism or quantum mechanical determinism, which is different from classical determinism. Okay, we don't have free will, but we are not deterministic in the classical sense. So, what about free will explanation? People find it very hard to give up the idea of free will. So they try to find ways of explaining our behavior in some sort of free will model. There's Anthony Cashmore lays it out clearly what the problem with this is. Whereas much is written claiming to provide an explanation for free will, such writings are invariably lacking any hint of molecular details concerning mechanisms. How does it act? Also, it is often suggested that individuals are free to choose and modify their environment, and that in this respect, they control their destiny. This argument misses the simple but crucial point that any action, as free as it may seem, simply reflects the genetics of the organism and the environmental history, right up to some fraction of a microsecond before any action. The reality is that not only do we have no more free will than a fly or a bacterium, in actuality, we have no more free will than a bowl of sugar. The laws of nature are uniform throughout, and these laws do not accommodate the concept of free will. So now let's look at the consequences. What happens? Because this is what Milos was asking about. Most things will not change. We will use the same language of free will. There's no harm in that. We'll continue to say, I choose, I decide, and I judge, and so on. That's fine. The major practical change is how we view morality. So we will not make judgments of good or bad people, but about just good or bad actions. There's no sense in labeling people as good or bad if they were not consciously, if they did not have will. They were just acting according to the GES of their system. So what does it mean to say someone is good or bad? But we can label actions as good or bad depending on whether they are harmful or beneficial. So it shifts from people to actions. What the elimination of free will does is remove the element of moral judgment from punishment. The sole reason for quote unquote punishing people is to prevent the commission of future crimes, not to make moral statements about the culprit's character or to seek retribution and vengeance. So we would not, we talk about people's evil motives and the motives for doing things, but that would become irrelevant. So how would we, deal with what kind of punishments? There is a philosopher called Dirk Pereboom who prescribed what he calls a medical quarantine model for punishment. And it's based on the fact that how we treat people who are ill. For example, some people have a medical malady that makes them infectious or dangerous to others. We have to do something about that. What do? We recognize that it is not their fault and do not punish them for their actions. What we do with such people is to protect others. It is acceptable to constrain the freedom of such people. Okay? So we should constrain the person the absolute minimal amount needed for the purpose of deterrence and to protect everyone, including themselves, from harm, and no more. So the idea of punishing people because it makes us feel good, because we think they deserve it, they need to suffer, those things would be eliminated. The only reason for punishment is to deter them. So the punishment for criminal acts should follow the same model. As a result, trials would become simpler, only used to decide if the person committed the act that they are accused of. Motive or mental state of perpetrator will play no part. So for example, much of trials nowadays spend time on motive. Why did they do it? Did they freely do it? Was it self-defense? Was it malicious? And so on. And you get psychologists coming in and so on and discussing the mental state. You put them through a medical analysis, psychological analysis, and all that. All those would be thrown out. All we are interested in is, did this person do it? If the person did it, and if we think that they want to protect the society from them, we constrain them. But that's it. So trials actually would become a lot simpler. The need to believe in free will is strong. So denying it will be strongly resisted since sense of volition, free will is so deeply held. And I think we all know counter evidence rarely persuades true believers of anything that they are wrong. I mean, we were going to have Paul Carr talk about flat earthers and the moon landing hoax and all these kinds of things. 9/11 was the entire. People who truly believe in something, however much counter evidence you present to them, if you've tried it, it rarely works. Because they can always find some alternative hypothesis to explain away the counter evidence. Okay? It's deeply ingrained prejudices are hard to shake with counter evidence. I think that the theoretical arguments, such as the absence of any mechanism, are more likely to succeed in the case of free will. If you can't persuade people that the moon landing was not a hoax, or that the earth is not flat, where the counter evidence is manifest and easily understood, how are you going to provide them with counter evidence for free will, which involves esoteric evidence like fMRI studies and so on? It's not going to work. But ask them, okay, you believe in free will. What is the mechanism by which this free will acts? How does it work? So that the basic biological facts of physical behavior are overridden. Okay. I like to end, this is my last slide, with a quote from the famous writer Isaac Bashevis Singer, and he said, "We must believe in free will. We have no choice." Okay, questions? Go ahead.
So I was really struck by Anthony Cashmore's initial definition. And he claims that free will is a belief.
Yeah.
A belief. And so he's basically saying any discussion of free will is tantamount to a subjective narrative. It's simply constituted out of a bunch of letters or a bunch of characters. But then he goes on to say that it is something. So there's a basic contradiction in and of itself. First of all, claims it's only a narrative. But then he says it is something, which obviously he doesn't yet clearly understand because he hasn't defined it yet. And then he says, well, he defines it in the negative. He says that it is something, which he has not yet defined, which is no more than the unavoidable consequences of GES.
Right.
Now, we got a problem here. We've got at least 4 problems. First of all, what if GES can also be understood by, according to his own terms, right, by his own assumptions, what if GES is nothing more than a belief or a narrative? You understand where I'm going with this, right?
Not really.
So he's using one narrative, he's creating it in and of himself, and he's claiming that this narrative is more powerful than another narrative which he doesn't believe in. In other words, This is a postmodernist definition, which is supposedly or is quasi-scientific. And second, he doesn't understand that if you pose a postmodernist definition, it's not really a scientific definition, because the whole point of postmodernism is to deconstruct narratives such as science, which are not true in and of themselves, but which are true because we believe that they're true.
Postmodernism is often used as a pejorative to discredit certain elements of modern scholarship. I don't know that what you mean by narrative. You're using the word narrative and saying it's constructive narrative. He's using words to describe what he thinks are phenomena, and so whenever you use words to describe phenomena, you're creating a narrative. You can say anything that you say is a narrative.
Absolutely.
But what he was describing was that we work according to our behaviors governed by our genes, our environment, and stochastic elements. Calling it a narrative and then labeling that narrative as postmodern, I don't see that you have advanced anywhere. You have just...
I'll clarify, let me explain it a little bit further. So these English letters, right?
Which letters are GES?
Such as GES, just as FREEWILL, okay? This is our subjective understanding of how to represent biological or material phenomena.
Okay.
Now, if I happen to be a native speaker of Cantonese or of Spanish, for example, the characters that we use are going to look quite a bit different, and their sequencing obviously is not going to be the same. The placement of subject predicate is also going to differ, okay?
Can I stop you? Let me stop you.
Just let me finish. So what I'm saying is, we can use any arbitrary set of characteristics in order to identify and in order to label material biological phenomena. But that doesn't mean that these arbitrary, subjective, historically specific characters are somehow the best representation. They are a specific and subjective representation of material and organic and biological phenomena.
We are getting deep into weeds of epistemology.
Right.
How do we know things? What is the nature of knowledge? And that's a whole different discussion. I think that what I was trying to prevent is something that is, you can never get away from epistemology, and I grant you that. But I was trying to think that Cashmo in my talk tried to strip away as much as possible from those elements and present it in as simple and biological terms as possible. We cannot get away from the use of language. So we are always the victims of debates over epistemology. But I think that's a level of esoteric discussion that I think we're not going to be involved. Yes, you.
I might have the easiest question because I'm pretty sure there's no answer. But I want to ask it anyways. It's that why question. What would be the evolutionary advantage of having a consciousness when it takes up so much energy, and it's what keeps me up till 2 a.m. like last night, and I just go, and I just don't understand why it would be there in the first place.
Okay, so the trouble with, clearly we are products of an evolutionary process.
Yeah.
But trying to assign evolutionary explanations for specific phenomena is fraught with terror. You can end up creating just so stories to explain things. So it can, the idea of having free will could definitely have survival value, in the sense that thinking that we can take actions to prevent harm to ourselves and so on. I can see it having survival value if you just say, oh, well, there's a lion, I'm just going to hang around and do nothing and expect, it's not good. So being able to say, okay, I'm going to do this and escape and have the sense that I can escape by making decisions is beneficial. But I'm not claiming that is the explanation, okay, because these explanations all over the place. You can manufacture them very easily, and any explanation that can be manufactured very easily should be viewed with deep skepticism for many other reasons that Kyle mentioned earlier in his talk. Yes.
A lot of evolutionary development can be just emergent from things that may have advantage, evolutionary or survival advantage, and were not the direct product of something that was evolutionarily beneficial, but like, oh, and maybe just having a big brain that developed for other reasons, being able to map our social landscape and all that, also conferred this level of complexity. It's like, why am I thinking all these other things that it may just come as part of the package?
Yes, that's exactly true. I mean, a lot of things that we do are accidental byproducts of processes that evolve for other things. And yeah, disentangling them is very difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
A conventional piece of advice is that if you have a habit of eating all the junk food in the house, that when you're at the store, you should make the decision not to buy junk food, right? So if there's no free will, do I have any influence about my future weight?
You, as I said, you are a unitary system. You make decisions about what to eat, but that those decisions, the point is that those decisions are made by you as a unitary system. You don't have a mind that acts independently of your body and tells your body what to do. Your body and mind are just one united system that cannot be disentangled. So yes, you make decisions about food, but those decisions will be influenced by your history, by your environment. You may have, as you know, so you might be primed to think. You may have watched the TV document now, even watched the movie Super Size Me and say, okay, I'm not going to eat milk anymore. So that's your environment telling you to do something. And that's fine. I mean, that's how we live. We are a unitary system. What I'm trying to say is that there's no real you inside deciding what the physical you does.
Dieting might be easier if we had true free will. Just decide not to eat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can this not be changed? I'm thinking of people who believe so strongly in nonviolence that they, don't run when on the bridge at Selma, when people on horses are coming at them with guns, and people who continue to sit in the sit-in when someone pours hot coffee on their head. So can you be trained to overcome that reaction?
Sure.
They seem to have been, they studied hard.
I mean, when we say we don't have free will, we are not simply saying that we are reactive people, just blindly reacting to immediate danger. We can overcome. When I say we can overcome, it's not that we are choosing to. Our biological systems can develop in such a way that we can learn based on our environment and our influences to not do things in certain situations that we might have done if we had not prepared ourselves in advance.
So my mistake was thinking of all of those things that happened when we were children. You're saying we can continue to have that environment and make that change us. So
Yeah.
we got a lot of work to do in that area to stop violence.
I mean, that's what one of the people, free will explanations say. We can change the environment, and by changing the environment, we are acting as agents of change. But again, we are doing that because of our GES. We are using our GES to change the environment and hope that the environment will then change us back on us. It's a complicated system. Any other questions? Yes. Well, Jay.
Can you tell us about your book?
The book doesn't actually touches on these things, but it's the great paradox of science. It's a history and philosophy of science book. And basically, it asks the question, we think that science is progressing, and it is progressing. But the question is, what is it progressing towards? And the common answer given even by scientists that is progressing towards something should be called, for want of a better word, the truth about the universe. That argument really cannot be sustained. The historical evidence doesn't show that we can talk of progress, but there's no evidence to show that it's progressing towards the truth. And the closest parallel is again to evolution. When we are evolving, society is evolving, people are evolving, and we're getting more and more refined. But what are we evolving towards something, towards some ideal form of humanity or life? No. We are simply evolving from the past. We are not evolving towards anything. And science is similarly like that. It's evolving from its past based on contingent factors now, and it will change and it will progress, and we will do better things with it. But we are not. I do not believe that we are getting towards anything called the truth, and that was the point of the book. Make the argument.
But there's a better understanding.
Just before. So that's the point. I wrote the book because it was a one long argument laying out why the traditional picture of scientific evolution is not valid. Don't get me wrong, it's not my original idea. Thomas Kuhn said it a long time ago. A lot of people have said it a long time ago. The so-called realists. But I just felt that a lot of those philosophical works were not intelligible to the general public. So my work is really a translation or so don't get the idea that this is my original ideas. It's not. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, not necessarily to the truth, but to a better and improved understanding of natural phenomena, including ourselves, and so
it may not be better. It may, we increase our control over the environment. Okay, so the problem with the model is that because it's contingent on the past, the decisions made by scientists in the past, we are now at a state of science that seems for us to be inevitable, but it's not. If we had made different decisions in the past as to which scientific theories we would believe and build on, we might have ended up with a completely different scientific structure now. And the question is, how does one decide whether that is true? It's as difficult to answer as the question, if we ran the clock again from the beginning of biological evolution, could we have ended up with a better living system than we have now? Human beings are wonderful, but we have all kinds of problems, right? It's not like our bodies are perfect.
Oh, no.
If we had run the clock again, maybe people would have evolved in a way that we would be better.
No, but with scientific evolution.
Hang on, let me finish the point. The question I always think is, we talk of UFOs and extraterrestrials sometimes. For me, the only interesting question, I would love to meet an extraterrestrial. Okay? For one reason. The question that I would be interested in is, are there scientific laws? They must be very advanced to have come here. Their science must be tremendous. Are there scientific laws the same as our scientific laws? Because there's no reason to think that they evolved in the same way. If they are similar, identical to ours, or very similar, such as a similar simple translation, then maybe there's some substance to the claim that we are evolving towards learning what those universal scientific laws are. But unless we have that kind of test, all we have is one example of the evolution of scientific ideas, and that's the one that we have on the earth. We don't know if that is unique or it's the only way that science could have evolved, just as we do not know if the biological systems that we have on the earth are unique or the only way that they could have evolved. With biology, because there are so many different organisms to see, in life, we can envisage that we could have had different human beings if things had turned out differently in the past. But since scientific knowledge is so universal now,
yes,
there's just globally, pretty much there's just one science. It's a hegemony. So we have no alternative scientific models that we can really compare with.
but we're not inventing these. It's more of a discovery. So if it hadn't been Newton or Leibniz, somebody else would have figured this out. If it hadn't been Einstein, somebody else would have figured these out. So when I used to teach science history, it was less about names, dates, and places. It's about the discoveries. And so our discoveries, again, if you burn all the religious texts, in 500 years, there would be new ones. If you burn all the science books, in 500 years, the same science would emerge.
No, there's no guarantee of that. The question of, when you say that science is discovery and not invention, that's a hotly debated issue. Is science discovery? When we say it's discovery, we think it's like finding a fossil in the ground. And you said if Einstein or Newton hadn't come along and did that, somebody else would have done the same thing.
Yes.
There's no guarantee that is true. We
but-
don't know that.
This sounds like a great reason to read your book.
There is no reason to believe that, because and as I said, as Thomas Kuhn said, the reason we think so is because at any given time, the scientific knowledge that we have seems so strong as to be inevitable. But we have to remember that scientific theories which was thought to be absolutely true at one time were overturned. At one time it was believed the ether was real. It was about as real as the thing as anyone could imagine. We don't believe it anymore.
But just because past hypotheses and explanations have been shown to be false doesn't mean that now everything is suspect. I mean, we're not going to go back and find out that, in fact, the Earth is at the center of the solar system, or that a lot of things that are well documented, well established, are going to be false or suspect. So I think we are getting closer to more or less universal.
This is the same belief people have had throughout history about the current state of scientific theories. Okay? We're talking about scientific theories. That at any given time, those theories appeared to be absolutely true. People believed it. Go back, read the literature of early 20th century, 18th. Ever since modern science, really, with Newton, people thought there was no way Newton's theories of motion could be wrong or false or required modification. Okay? And that is a trap we fall into, thinking that what exists now, because it works pretty well. I mean, if it didn't work so well, we wouldn't do it. So science works. Why it works is different. And the idea that scientific theories are discovered, when we use the word discovered, we think there is a world of scientific theories out there in the universe that we do not know of, and with our investigation, we will find them, just like anthropologists discover fossils in the ground and so on. But there's no reason to think that they are discovered in that sense. There is a pretty good argument that scientific theories are inventions and have always been inventions, and at any given time in history, the invention that is picked as to be true happens to be the one that works best at that time. Just as the biological organism that evolved happened to be the one that worked in that environment in the past. There's no guarantee that those would have been the ones best now. So that's why there is a case to be made that these things, scientific theories, are inventions and not discoveries.
The theories are explanations of observed phenomena.
Yes.
So we discover phenomena, we create theories to explain. So those are two different things.
True.
The fact that your theories aren't 100% doesn't invalidate the phenomena. Evolution is fact. The theory of evolution is an explanation with natural selection and all that. But people have arguments about the mechanisms of evolution. Doesn't mean that evolution itself didn't happen. So,
but
gravity.
Okay, this is an interesting discussion. We can go in, but there are certain problems with what you said that I can debate. I'm not sure that people want to listen too much to that.
Well, we're gonna go to lunch here.
Yeah,
We're gonna
pizza's
have a
here.
lunch break. We can obviously allow you to debate during the pizza.
Okay, we can continue this discussion. I'm happy to continue this discussion.
Yeah, because I don't think we'll settle it right now.
Yeah, we're not going to sell it ever, but
Yeah.
but it's fun to talk.
So this is probably,